In the last video in the digital scouting series, we talked about how to read a topographic map, how hunters can use it to read terrain, and how to figure out how to navigate in the woods or wherever you're hunting. So all those things are important, but now in this video we're going to talk about how to actually plan your hunt and how to navigate, whether it's in the dark or during the day, and why, carrying this compass is important no matter if you have a mobile app, GPS, or whatever, and it can get you out of trouble, believe me. So we're going to talk about how to plan your hunt and get you in and out undetected and ensure you're successful. So let's jump into it now. Once again, I'm Mike, the Everyday Bone Hunter. If you like the video, please smash the like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. We'd love to have you back for more videos, and I got a lot more coming. But let's get into this. So we're going to talk about how to plan your hunt and be a more effective bow hunter. Starting off with number one thing, obviously, is scouting. So getting your feet on the ground or digital scouting. If you identify points that you want to get in there and you want to hunt, the first thing, the number one thing, is knowing exactly where you want to set up your stand. As you can see on the screen here, I've gotten on the ground, I've went out and I identified a couple different bedding areas that looks like good spots for mature bucks. As you can see here, I'm using Onyx for this example. You can use any number of hunting apps that are going to show you the same level of detail here. I use a combination of a hybrid look, which shows me both my topography on the map, and I'm using being able to see the satellite images, so I get a kind of a better lay of the land, and I can see what the density of the forest is and other things like that. I also, on this particular layer that I'm using, I have what you can see here. There's little boxed in areas that show clear cuts that were done. As you know, these areas tend to be really good areas for deer to go in. They create a lot of vegetation that deer like to eat, a lot of greenbrier and other things like that they can eat. I found on this, you can see I found buck bedding, which I scouted all across this point here, which is fairly high. It's kind of steep terrain down to what is one of the main dirt roads in that area. But there was really no bedding around that point at all, which was the first place I scouted. Those contour lines show that it's a fairly easy walking area, and it was very easy walking in there. And when I went in there, I identified this as where that bed would be. So with that being on the leeward side of that, I would suspect that the winds that were best for that bedding is when you have the winds coming from the west to east. So that makes an area where I now have to plan. If I'm going to plan a hunt for this particular spot, I am now going to look at my potential routes into the spot. I'm going to look at the winds that are good for me for that spot, and I'm going to say how I can get in and how I can get out, and what times of day that I'm looking at hunting this. Now, as I looked at this, I said this deer possibly was looking out here. You could see down in here a little bit, and that area is kind of more open in the woods. And I don't know if you can see that from this. Maybe if I zoom in, you can see it's not super thick. But what you can't see from this imagery is that area, the clear cut, is pretty thick. So it's pretty thick in that clear cut area, and you can see the trails going in there. But what you also can see is the trails coming up through here and pushing out here. So there are multiple trails coming into this bedding location, and all around that bed location you also had a bunch of rubs clustered around that bed. So you can see that it's a primary bedding area. Looking at this, and so backing off again and look where my entrance points are. Now I then have to look at how can I access this in the most efficient manner. So one, I'm looking at the time of day. So the time of day for this. So one of the things I looked at was I can walk up this road here, and I can get myself up to where I just pop onto this bench and come down here. But the problem with that is if I'm not beating the deer there, the winds, if they are coming from the west, all my wind is pushing into that deer. So now I have to change and look at what way can I come into this spot, thinking about where the deer are coming from and not knowing. So this tends to end up being almost more of a hunt where I say to myself, it's too tricky in the morning. I have to make this a evening hunt. So I want to get in there early in the afternoon. I want to get close, but I don't want to push this buck out of his bed. But I also want to take advantage of the natural travel routes to whatever food he's going to. So I find that a lot of these travel routes are actually going back into the clear cut, but they're also nestled up in this area just up from where that buck bed is, just to the north there. So what I did find was a pretty good spot, not too far away. And I'm going to show this as a little bit farther away than what it actually is, just so we can depict it better here. We're not having these icons on top of each other. And now I'm saying that I am going to put my stand right there, hoping that once that deer comes out, he's going to travel those trails, because there's probably like 2 trails that come down this bench and then work their way down to the water source, towards that water. There's also, as you can see here, there's a very good water source right here that the deer come down to at night to get a drink. I want to put myself in the path of that deer coming out of that bed in a normal travel corridor. Now on top of that, in this particular area, it is loaded with oaks, and it has a lot of acorns on the ground in there. So it's also good area as they're coming down through to feed down through in there. My biggest issue is that if the buck decides to get up and go into the clear cut to feed and not go for water first. I know that if I have a westerly wind, I should be good, because I put myself in a position where if that deer comes down through here, my wind should still be good for him. It might not be great, but it'd be good. Also, as the evening progresses, the thermals here should have my thermals dropping down away towards the water, as opposed to pushing towards where he's bedded. So that's the other factor you have to play in here, your thermals and your winds. Now, the next thing we have to look at, how can we actually travel up here without killing ourselves at the same time and make it expeditious? So now what we have to do is, and you can do this 2 ways. You can either say, I'm going to plan my route when I'm walking out. So I have gone in there and I scouted, and I have my mobile app on my phone or GPS, whatever you're using, and I'm now going to map out exact waypoints for places that I want to use as key indicators for my travel route. Now, if you weren't able to do that and you're doing this digitally like I am now, you have to say, okay, let me look at the terrain here and let me establish the best way to walk in here without, killing myself. Now, there's obviously some steep terrain up ahead of me, but I have to look at where I'm actually going to park my vehicle. Is it going to be down in here? Are there other parking locations down here that'll keep me out of the wind and maybe allow me to work in here quietly? So is my best option to establish, a parking area here, knowing that this is fairly steep in here, but I'm willing to walk the extra distance to keep from, one, spooking the deer, giving myself some movement, ability to move, and then getting up on this fairly flat bench here, and then walking down into the area I want to hunt without disturbing the deer. So what I ultimately planned here and did for this was I did find a relatively good parking area here. To make it easier, I just said I am going to set an azimuth with my compass, and I'm going to walk straight in here to this point, and I set an azimuth with my compass on that. What I also did was established exactly how far that is, and you can see the elevation there that it is and everything here on Onyx. You can get it, but it's 357 yards and it's 137 feet in elevation, so it's not terrible. It's not a terrible walk. So establish that. That's now leg 1. Now leg 2, I allow myself to terrain associate, but not everybody can do terrain association. So I want to walk down this bench. I want to try to hug this contour line, which of course you can't see contour lines on the ground, obviously, but the ground would be relatively flat. So I can put myself, using both my GPS and my compass, I can put myself generally on a a azimuth that's going to help me a direction with my compass, I can put myself down this bench and walk down this bench and stay on it. And as I find myself turning with the terrain, showing that that will turn and I'll walk, and that point will be well established and be able to really see that. But if you're not comfortable with that, it's easy to establish looking at my terrain. Okay, I want to come down through here, and I want to say that once I get within, if I travel down through here and I want to be in this general area coming in, I can establish another waypoint. Now, one rule of thumb I have is distance. If it's over 1,000 yards, I need to establish another point. So let's look at the distance. And that's 710 yards, and that's not terrible distance there. And you can see I actually go up to that point, so I'll have that elevation change as well. That's going to help me as well. But once you're on a ridge line like this, on a bench like this, you can walk comfortably staying on that relatively flat ground and continue on that walking on it and not coming off of it. The second thing you do is you establish what is the direction for this. I get out my compass and I find out what my direction is, or get on my map and find out what direction this is, whether it's through your app or through actually using a protractor and compass on a map, and looking and saying, okay, I know that I'm going to be traveling approximately, let's say we're going to travel about 220 degrees, generally southwestern type direction for this distance, so that I'm going to make sure that I have established that 700 yards for that distance down there. Now, if I travel 700 yards and all of a sudden I figure out that I'm off track, I can then at least pull out my GPS and see exactly where I am in reference to that waypoint. But navigating in your phone and looking at your phone the entire time you're walking is a terrible way to keep situational awareness around you, what's going on, and seeing if there's other sign that you might find along your way there that you might say, hey, this is incredible sign here, I want to set up on this, as opposed to where I was going. But having that compass and be able to reference that and orient yourself is extremely important, so you don't get turned around, because with a mobile app you can very quickly get turned around because they're not always referencing north or they are always referencing north while you might be standing and facing south. So it's important to have that compass with you. So now I know I have 200 yards in there, and I know my general direction is going to be generally south, maybe southeast a little bit, and I can give myself an approximate, looking at my compass, I can say, oh, that's approximately 150 degrees, and I can generally say the direction I'm going. I can look at my app, I can track myself into that waypoint and say, okay, that is the best way to come into this spot. The next thing you do, obviously, at this point, is you do a double check on your winds to see what the winds are. Make sure they're still doing what you think they're supposed to do. You know, drop some milkweed or whatever and see the direction that wind is going. That is our entrance route. Now, to get out, you know, we might find that, you know, hey, as we've been in there, have we hunted, now the deer have moved down past us. They're now below us, and we don't want to push those deer out and let those deer know that we're there. So you might want to say that our exit route is different. Now, the one thing it doesn't change is where our car is parked, but it doesn't matter. You have to establish where that follow-on route is. And sometimes it is the easiest way is to go straight down, but establish that with your map and your waypoints before you go in. Don't do it after the fact. Also take in consideration your winds and everything. You don't want to blow this area out. So if those winds are still pushing west but then dragging down the mountain as you're dragging down, as the thermals pull down towards those deer, the best thing for you might be to take an alternate route out here and say, I'm going to go straight down. I'm going to go down from my stand location. I don't want to go down, and this is a pretty good draw right here. If you look at here at this on the map, we blow it up here a little bit. This is kind of a draw going down through here, and it tends to be thicker than this area here where you can see the trees are kind of farther apart and it's more open area, easy walking. So you take that into consideration. Here you have a point that glides down fairly well. So you might want to backtrack to that first waypoint and then establish waypoints going down, just to kind of give yourself a general idea of how far it is to walk, and say, okay, I've now established how far is it for me to walk from one point to another, and it comes out to 276 yards. So you know how far that is, and then you say, okay, from there I am just going to drop down over the steep stuff and I'm going to get to the road. I'm going to go straight to the road and establish a new waypoint there for that, and you're going to see how far that is, and that's basically 200 yards, 193 yards. So with that in mind, we now have basic routes, and this doesn't have to be perfect going out. It just gives you a general idea. You throw that compass up, you know you're generally going west, so 270 degrees. I'm now going 270 degrees with my compass. I go that distance. The number one thing you need to do, if you haven't done it already, if you're keyed up on your compass, that's great. The number one thing people have problems with is estimating distance. And at night, especially if you're traveling out of there with a flashlight and stuff, the worst thing you can do is have your face in this app looking at it. You need to be aware of your surroundings, what's going on, so you don't fall hurt yourself. The number one thing is having a pace count. So if you establish a good solid pace count, one thing that's going to allow you to navigate much easier and not hurt yourself is knowing that pace count. So what is your pace count? Pace count is literally taking 100 yards, go out on a football field, walk that 100 yards, or take your laser rangefinder out, plug a tree, find 100 yards, and say, okay, I'm going to walk this 100 yards, and every other step is a pace. Do a natural walk, do 100 yards, and see what your pace count is. Say, okay, I have a 58 pace count. That's 58 paces, 100 yards. Now, if you're walking easy terrain, that's generally going to be the same. Now you get into steep terrain, this is going to be different. So I recommend going into the woods, getting in some terrain, and using a rangefinder and hitting a tree 100 yards up the hill, and walk up that hill and see what your paces are for 100 yards. And you might find that now all of a sudden your pace count's 68 paces or 70 paces for when you're walking through actual terrain and you're kind of, sneaking along. It might even be 75. So knowing that, we now can say, okay, I just walked 100 yards, and I'd like to keep a little, set of beads on me, where in the Army we call them ranger beads. You pull each bead every 100 yards you go. That way you know exactly how far you've gone when you're traveling. So you say, well, I'm not pulling this out all the time and living in my phone when I'm trying to be focused on my terrain, and I can have this compass around my neck, pulling out, and just push it up to see the general direction that I'm traveling. That way I'm on track, and I'm reading the terrain around me to make sure I'm not off. Now, if you're having problems with this, one of the things that I always say is that if you want to maintain the direction and you want to keep a strict direction, is to take that compass, point it at a tree, off in the distance, rock, whatever, some kind of terrain feature, and say, boom, I now know exactly where that's at. I'm walking to that instead, and I'm going to keep my pace count going. So once I get there, I'm looking at the next tree beyond that, or the next rock, or whatever, and I'm pointing my compass at it for that direction and say, boom, I got it. That way, sometimes terrain can take you off track. It's not always as perfect as what's on your screen. Sometimes it can take you off track and be a little dip here, a little dip there. You go with the flow of the ground, the next thing you know, you're lost. Right? So instead of getting off track and lost, use your compass, use your pace count, and back it up with your app, and you will be good. And it'll help you plan your hunts a lot more effectively. You'll be safer, and you won't get busted. I hope that helps. I hope it helps you plan your hunts out a little bit, taking a couple different factors into play, and we'll see you next time.